The eviction notice arrived on a Tuesday morning tucked between a past-due electricity bill and a credit card statement. Jerome Patterson no longer opened. 14 days. The number sat there on official letterhead like a countdown timer to homelessness printed in that bureaucratic font that somehow made catastrophe feel procedural. He stood in the narrow kitchen of his studio apartment, the paper trembling slightly in his hands, and felt the familiar weight of failure pressing against his chest. Through the thin walls, he could hear Mrs. Chen next door humming something in Mandarin while cooking breakfast, unaware that her neighbor was quietly drowning. Zara was still asleep in the corner they'd converted into her bedroom with a curtain and some discount store decorations. Purple everywhere because purple was her favorite color, her declaration of identity in a world that kept trying to shrink their possibilities. She'd turned 8 in 3 months, and Jerome had already started lying about the birthday party she kept planning. The gymnastics place she wanted, the dozen friends she wanted to invite, the cake shaped like a scientist, because that's what she was going to be when she grew up. All of it impossible on his current bank balance of $43.17. 6 months. That's how long it had been since the accounting firm where he had worked for 9 years had called a mandatory morning meeting and announced corporate restructuring. Downsizing, they'd called it, as if using softer language made it hurt less when they took away your livelihood. Jerome had been good at his job, even excellent. His performance reviews proved it. But excellence didn't matter when private equity firms decided your division wasn't profitable enough. They'd given him 2 weeks severance for 9 years of 60-hour work weeks in perfect attendance. 2 weeks to figure out how to support a daughter on his own. The job market had been brutal. Every position wanted someone younger, cheaper, more flexible. The code words in rejection emails were always the same: overqualified, not quite the right fit, decided to go in a different direction. He'd applied to 347 positions across every category he could imagine. Accounting firms that never called back. Retail stores that said he was overqualified. Fast food restaurants that somehow never had openings despite the help wanted signs in their windows. Even Uber and Lyft had rejected his driver applications, something about his car's model year not meeting their standards. His 2010 Honda Civic sat in the apartment complex parking lot like a monument to better times. The paint had faded to a dusty gray blue, the passenger side mirror held on with duct tape, and the check engine light had been glowing for so long he'd stopped noticing it. But it ran mostly, and that had to be enough. The registration was due next month, another bill he couldn't pay, another small catastrophe waiting in the wings. Jerome had sold everything that had value. The flat-screen television his ex-wife had left behind when she moved to Phoenix with her new boyfriend. The expensive watch his mother had given him when he graduated college, the one that had belonged to his father before cancer took him at 52. His leather briefcase, his good suits, even his college textbooks. Everything convertible to Kia had already been converted, spent on rent and groceries and Zara's school supplies. There was nothing left to liquidate except dignity, and he was running low on that too. The internet cafe on the corner charged $2 an hour for computer access. Jerome went there every morning after dropping Zara at school, nursing a single cup of coffee, while scrolling through job listings that all started to look the same. Administrative assistant, warehouse worker, night security guard. He applied to all of them, tailoring his resume to hide his education when necessary, highlighting it when required, playing whatever game the algorithm wanted him to play. Nothing worked. That's when he'd seen the posting that everyone else was apparently ignoring. Personal driver wanted Whitmore Industries $75,000 annually. The salary alone should have attracted hundreds of applicants in a city where median income hovered around 50. But the reviews in the comments section told a different story. 5 drivers in the last 3 months. Ice Queen impossible to please, makes grown men cry. One former employee had written a 3-paragraph warning about Victoria Whitmore's exacting standards and complete lack of empathy. Another had simply posted, "Don't, just don't." Jerome had stared at that posting for 20 minutes, weighing desperation against self-preservation. $75,000 would change everything. Rent paid, electricity on real groceries instead of dollar store pasta. Zara's birthday party, her college fund, maybe even a weekend trip somewhere. She could see the ocean. The possibility of stability glittered like something just out of reach, simultaneously tantalizing and potentially poisonous. He'd applied at 11:47 p.m. on a Sunday night, expecting nothing. The automated response came back within seconds, but the personal email arrived the next morning. Interview scheduled for Wednesday, p.m. sharp, 40th floor. Bring references and be prepared to discuss availability for irregular hours. The tone was clipped professional and somehow already exhausting. Now it was Wednesday and Jerome stood in front of his bathroom mirror, trying to make himself look like someone worth $75,000 a year. The tie was his only good one, navy blue with a subtle pattern only slightly frayed at the edges where it had rubbed against too many cheap shirt collars. His suit was off the rack, purchased 8 years ago, when he could still afford department store prices. It didn't quite fit anymore, hung a little loose in places where stress had carved away weight he couldn't afford to lose. But it was clean pressed with an iron he'd borrowed from Mrs. Chen, and it would have to do. Zara appeared in the doorway, already dressed in her school uniform, her hair in the braids he'd learned to do from YouTube videos after her mother left. She studied him with those wide brown eyes that always saw too much. "You look fancy, Daddy. I have an important interview today, baby girl." "Is it a good job?" Jerome knelt down to her level, adjusting the collar of her polo shirt. "It could be, but we'll see." "Will you have to work at night again?" The question carried weight neither of them acknowledged directly. The few gigs he'd managed to scrape together over the last month's late-night janitorial work and weekend warehouse shifts had meant leaving her with Mrs. Chen more than either of them liked. Zara never complained, but he saw the way she clung a little tighter when he dropped her off, the fear in her eyes that maybe this time he wouldn't come back. "I don't know yet, sweetheart, but whatever happens, you're my #1 priority. Always." She hugged him then, fierce and sudden, and he held her, wondering how much longer he could keep making promises about stability he couldn't guarantee. The world didn't care about good fathers who tried their best. It cared about money and connections and luck, and Jerome was running catastrophically short on all three. Mrs. Chen met them at her door, already holding the after-school snacks Zara loved. She was 73, a widow who'd immigrated from Taiwan 40 years ago and still maintained the fierce kindness of someone who remembered what it meant to start over with nothing. She'd been watching Zara for free since Jerome lost his job, waving away his attempts to pay her with a firmness that brooked no argument. "You go get that job," she told him in her accented English. "Zara and I will be fine. We have art project today." "I can't thank you enough." "Thanks are just words. You take care of that beautiful girl, that's thanks enough." She fixed him with a look that carried decades of survived hardship. "And Jerome, hold your head up in there. You are worth more than they will want to pay you." He carried those words like armor as he drove across town to the gleaming tower of Whitmore Industries. The building occupied an entire city block in the financial district, all glass and steel and aggressive modernity. The parking garage required validation he didn't have, so he circled until he found street parking 6 blocks away. The meter demanded $3 an hour, and he fed it his last $5 bill, hoping the interview wouldn't run long. The walk gave him time to rehearse answers he'd practiced 100 times. "Why do you want this position?" "Because my daughter deserves to eat something other than ramen, and I'm 2 weeks from being homeless." "What are your greatest strengths?" "Desperation and the willingness to tolerate abuse for $75,000. "Where do you see yourself in 5 years?" "Employed, housed, and not crying myself to sleep, wondering what I did wrong." But those weren't the answers you gave in interviews, so he prepared the sanitized versions instead. "I'm looking for a position where I can provide excellent service while utilizing my organizational skills. I'm detail-oriented, reliable, and committed to exceeding expectations. I see myself growing with a company that values dedication and professionalism." The lies flowed easier with practice until he almost believed them himself. The lobby of Whitmore Industries was designed to intimidate. Marble floors polished to a mirror shine contemporary art that probably cost more than Jerome would earn in a lifetime, and a reception desk that sat elevated like a judge's bench. The security guard barely glanced at his ID before waving him through to the elevator bay. A group of executives in expensive suits crowded into one elevator, their conversation about quarterly projections and market positioning washing over him like a foreign language. He waited for the next car alone. The elevator climbed with stomach-dropping speed, the digital counter ticking through floors faster than he could track. 20, 30, 40. The doors opened onto a reception area that managed to be both minimalist and oppressive. Everything was white and chrome and sharp angles. A woman sat behind a desk made of what looked like a single piece of carved marble, her expression professionally neutral. Jerome Patterson, 2 o'clock interview. She consulted her computer screen without looking at him. You're 4 minutes early. Have a seat. Miss Whitmore runs precisely on time. The waiting area offered chairs that were more sculpture than furniture, beautiful and deeply uncomfortable. Jerome perched on one, careful not to touch anything that might be expensive or fragile or both. A copy of Forbes magazine lay on the glass coffee table, Victoria Whitmore's face on the cover. The Ice Queen's hot streak, how Victoria Whitmore doubled her father's empire. He picked it up, studying the woman who might become his employer. She looked impossibly young in the photograph, maybe 29, with platinum blonde hair cut in a severe bob that somehow emphasized rather than softened her features. Ice blue eyes stared out from the page with an intensity that felt accusatory even in print. The article detailed her rise to CEO after her father's sudden retirement 3 years ago. Industry insiders had predicted disaster. A trust fund princess with an MBA but no real experience was going to run a multi-billion-dollar tech conglomerate. The vultures had been circling before she'd even moved into the corner office. Except she'd proved them all wrong. Stock prices had doubled. 3 major acquisitions, all profitable. A reputation for ruthless efficiency and standards so high that executive turnover hit 30% in her first year. She fired vice presidents like other people, changed socks always with cause, always with documentation, and always without apparent remorse. The business world had stopped calling her a princess and started calling her the Ice Queen. The article couldn't decide if that was admiration or warning. The part about her personal life took up exactly 1 paragraph. Famously private, rarely seen at social events, no known romantic relationships. One former colleague was quoted saying, "Victoria married the company. There's no room in her life for anything that doesn't contribute to profit margins." Jerome wondered what kind of person chose that kind of existence, all work and no warmth. Then he remembered he was about to beg that person for a job and decided philosophical questions could wait. At exactly 2 o'clock, the office doors opened as if on cue. Victoria Whitmore emerged, and the photograph hadn't captured half of her presence. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted her right to occupy space, her designer suit probably costing more than Jerome's monthly rent back when he could pay it. Everything about her was sharp, her haircut, her heels, the assessment in her eyes as they landed on him. "Mr. Patterson." Her voice matched the rest of her, crisp and cold and utterly controlled. She didn't offer her hand, didn't smile, didn't do anything that might suggest this was a social interaction rather than a business transaction. Jerome stood, hoping his cheap suit wasn't as obvious as it felt under her scrutiny. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you for seeing me." "You're on time. That's encouraging since punctuality was apparently beyond my previous 5 drivers." She turned without waiting for a response, and Jerome followed her into an office that looked like it had been decorated by someone who thought warmth was a sign of weakness. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the city that probably made lesser mortals weep. The desk was the size of his kitchen, made of some dark wood that gleamed with the patina of old money. Everything else in the room existed to reinforce a single message: whoever occupied this space held power, and they knew how to use it. Victoria sat behind her desk and gestured to the chair across from her. Jerome sat acutely aware that even the furniture was designed to create hierarchy. Her chair was higher, larger positioned, so the light from the windows would be behind her, putting her face in shadow while illuminating whoever sat opposite. It was a power play so calculated it almost impressed him. "I've reviewed your resume. 9 years in corporate accounting, solid performance reviews, no disciplinary issues." She looked up from the folder in front of her, and her eyes were precisely as cold as the magazine cover had suggested. "So why are you applying to be someone's driver?" The question was a trap, and Jerome knew it. Too honest, and he'd sound desperate. Too polished, and he'd sound like a liar. He chose something in the middle, a truth that was incomplete but not false. The accounting industry has been experiencing significant consolidation. My previous firm was acquired, and my entire division was eliminated. I've been searching for positions that utilize my skills while providing stable income for my family. Your family. Victoria's eyes dropped to his file again. You have a daughter, 7 years old, single father, no other dependents listed. That's correct. Most people would consider this position beneath someone with your education and experience. Jerome felt something shift in his chest, a spark of anger he couldn't quite suppress. With respect, Miss Whitmore, I don't consider any honest work beneath me. Providing for my daughter isn't about prestige. It's about showing up every day and doing whatever needs to be done. For the first time, Victoria's expression changed, something that might have been interest flickering across her face before the professional mask reasserted itself. The position requires availability from 6 in the morning until whenever I no longer need you. Some days that's 8 p.m. Some days it's midnight. The schedule is unpredictable and non-negotiable. I understand. You'll be responsible for maintaining the vehicle, managing my schedule coordination with my assistant, and representing this company whenever you're on duty. Image matters, Mr. Patterson. I can't have a driver who looks or acts unprofessionally. Jerome thought about his car with the duct tape mirror, his suit that didn't quite fit the last $5 he'd just fed to a parking meter. I take my responsibilities seriously, ma'am. If you hire me, you'll have no complaints about my appearance or conduct. My previous drivers said the same thing. One quit after 2 weeks because I expected him to work on Saturdays. Another left because I corrected his route choices. The most recent abandoned me in the middle of rush hour traffic because I asked him to take an alternate route due to construction. Her voice carried an edge of something that might have been frustration on a person less controlled. Are you going to abandon your responsibilities when things get difficult, Mr. Patterson? The eviction notice flashed through his mind. 14 days. Zara's face when he told her they might have to move again, the careful way she'd nodded like she was used to disappointment. Mrs. Chen's kindness that he couldn't repay. All the accumulated weight of 6 months of failure pressing down on him, demanding he find a way forward even when there didn't seem to be one. No, ma'am, I won't abandon anything I commit to. Victoria studied him for a long moment, and Jerome had the unsettling sensation of being x-rayed, all his secrets and fears laid bare under that analytical gaze. She stood abruptly, moving to the windows, her silhouette backlit by the afternoon sun. I inherited this company when I was 26 years old. Every analyst, every competitor, every member of my own board expected me to fail. They thought I was a spoiled child playing at business, that I'd run the company into the ground within a year. She didn't turn around, and Jerome wondered if this confession was for him or for herself. I proved them wrong by being better than they were. Smarter, faster, more ruthless when necessary. But that comes at a cost. She turned then, and something in her expression was different. Less armor and more truth. I work 18-hour days because anything less means falling behind. I travel constantly because deals don't close themselves. I attend events where I have to smile and make small talk with people who still think of me as my father's daughter rather than my own person. And I have zero tolerance for incompetence because incompetence costs money, jobs, and reputation. I understand. Do you? The question was sharp. Because most people say they understand and then they resent me for actually expecting excellence. They want to do the minimum and collect a paycheck, and when I demand more, I'm labeled difficult. Jerome chose his words carefully, sensing that this moment mattered in ways he couldn't fully parse. Miss Whitmore, I spent 9 years doing excellent work for people who replaced me the moment it became financially convenient. I know what it's like to give everything to something that doesn't reciprocate your loyalty. But I also know that excellence matters not because of paychecks or recognition, but because it's the only thing we actually control. Victoria's eyes widened, fractionally surprised, breaking through the ice for just a moment. Most applicants see this as temporary work beneath them. You seem to understand it's a serious position. I need this job, Miss Whitmore, and I'll do it better than anyone you've had before. The silence stretched between them, heavy with assessment and possibility. Jerome could hear his own heartbeat, the faint sounds of traffic 40 floors below, the whisper of air conditioning, maintaining the office's controlled climate. Everything balanced on this moment, his entire future compressed into whatever decision was forming behind those calculating eyes. You start Monday, 6 a.m. sharp. I'll have my assistant send you the details on the vehicle you'll be driving, dress code requirements, and the basic schedule template. The salary is $75,000 annually with benefits including health insurance for you and your daughter. She moved back to her desk, the interview apparently concluded. Don't disappoint me, Mr. Patterson. Jerome stood, relief and terror mixing in his chest in equal measures. I won't, ma'am. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You haven't actually done the job. He left the office feeling like he'd just agreed to something both miraculous and potentially disastrous. The receptionist handed him a folder, thick with documents, employment, contract, benefits, enrollment, background check, authorizations, vehicle policies. He signed everything without reading it too carefully, afraid that if he hesitated too long, the offer would evaporate like every other opportunity that had slipped through his fingers. The walk back to his car felt different, the city suddenly less hostile. He'd done it. 6 months of rejection and failure, and he'd finally gotten through one door. The job started Monday, which gave him exactly 5 days to figure out how to be the kind of driver a billionaire CEO wouldn't fire within 3 weeks. 5 days to transform desperation into competence. Mrs. Chen opened her door before he could knock, Zara visible behind her, covered in paint and glitter. Daddy, we made butterflies. She held up a construction paper creation that was more enthusiasm than artistry, and Jerome felt his throat tighten with the kind of love that hurt because it was all he had to give and also everything that mattered. It's beautiful, baby girl, just like you. Did you get the job? Mrs. Chen asked, her eyes sharp with hope. I got the job. Zara screamed and launched herself at him, paint-stained hands, leaving marks on his interview suit that he didn't care about at all. Mrs. Chen smiled the kind of smile that carried decades of wisdom about what it meant to catch a break when you desperately needed one. I knew you would. You're a good man, Jerome. Good things come to good people eventually. He wanted to believe that, wanted to think that the universe operated on some kind of karmic justice where hard work and integrity actually meant something. But he'd learned over the last 6 months that the universe was mostly indifferent, and good things came to people who got lucky at the right moment. Still, he held his daughter and let himself feel grateful for whatever confluence of circumstances had put him in that office at exactly the right time. That night, after Zara was asleep behind her purple curtain, Jerome sat at his tiny kitchen table and read through the employment contract properly. The salary was real. The benefits were comprehensive. The expectations were terrifying. Available at all hours, professional appearance, maintained at all times, complete discretion regarding business matters, termination without cause, possible at any time. He was trading security for the illusion of security, but what choice did he have? He looked up Victoria Whitmore on his phone, scrolling through article after article about her business acumen and her reputation. Every piece mentioned her age, her inheritance, and her ruthlessness. Several included the nickname Ice Queen, like it was part of her official title. One business journal had run a profile titled The Loneliest Corner Office, Victoria Whitmore's Brilliant Isolated Empire. The article painted a picture of someone who'd sacrificed everything personal for professional success. No friends, no romantic relationships, no hobbies or interests outside of Whitmore Industries. She worked from 6 a.m. until midnight, most days traveled 3 weeks out of every month, and had apparently never taken a vacation in the 3 years since assuming the CEO position. Former employees described her as brilliant but cold, capable of making decisions that affected thousands of lives without apparent emotion. One quote stood out from a board member who'd resigned a year into her tenure: Victoria sees people as assets or liabilities. There's no middle ground with her, no room for human weakness or complexity. She's optimized herself into something terrifyingly efficient and utterly alone. Jerome closed his phone and stared at the ceiling of his apartment, wondering what kind of person chose that isolation. What drove someone with unlimited resources and opportunities to construct a life that sounded more like a prison than an empire? But then he thought about his own choices over the last 6 months, the things he'd sacrificed trying to stay afloat, and realized that maybe everyone was alone in their own way. Maybe Victoria Whitmore just had a bigger empire to be lonely in. The weekend passed in a blur of preparation. Jerome borrowed money from Mrs. Chen to get his car detailed, even though he wouldn't be driving it for work. He bought 2 new white shirts from a discount store and a pair of black pants that actually fit. He practiced different routes across the city using Google Maps, memorizing traffic patterns and alternate paths. He researched Whitmore Industries until he could recite their quarterly earnings and recent acquisitions from memory. Sunday night he couldn't sleep. Zara had made him a good luck card covered in glitter and stickers, misspelled encouragement that he tucked into his wallet where he could see it every time he reached for his ID. To the best daddy, you can do anything. Love, Zara. The faith children had in their parents was both inspiring and crushing a weight and a gift that defied easy categorization. At 5:15 Monday morning, Jerome stood in front of his bathroom mirror, adjusting his new shirt collar and trying to quiet the panic rising in his chest. This was it. The first day of the job he couldn't afford to lose. The beginning of whatever came next, for better or worse. He thought about all the men who'd quit before him, all the warnings in the job posting reviews, and made a conscious choice. He would be different. He would find a way to be what Victoria Whitmore needed, even if what she needed was someone who could tolerate her impossible standards without breaking. The company garage was in the basement of Whitmore Tower, 3 levels of sleek black vehicles that probably cost more than most people's houses. A security guard directed him to the executive section where a pristine black Mercedes S-Class sat waiting. The keys were in an envelope taped to the driver's side window, along with a note in precise handwriting, vehicle manual and glove box. Study it. Standards are attached. VW. The standards document was 3 pages long, single-spaced, detailing everything from appropriate music volume to acceptable cologne usage to proper door opening technique. Jerome read it twice, then started the Mercedes and spent 20 minutes familiarizing himself with the controls before Victoria was due to arrive at 6. She appeared at 6:03, striding toward the car with the kind of urgency that suggested she was already late for something despite being early. Jerome had the door open before she reached it, standing at parade rest the way the standards document specified. "Good morning, Miss Whitmore." She glanced at him, and he couldn't read anything in her expression except assessment. "Mr. Patterson, we have a board breakfast at 6:30, the Sterling Hotel downtown. Traffic will be heavy." "Yes, ma'am, I've mapped 3 possible routes accounting for rush hour patterns." Something flickered across her face there and gone too quickly to interpret. She slid into the back seat without comment, already pulling out her phone and typing before he closed the door. The drive took 22 minutes, and Victoria spent every second of it working. Phone calls conducted in that clipped, efficient voice. Emails typed with practiced speed. Once a conversation in what sounded like Mandarin, her pronunciation flawless. Jerome focused on driving, choosing his routes carefully, trying to make the ride as smooth as possible while navigating Monday morning traffic that had apparently conspired to be worse than usual. They arrived at the Sterling Hotel with 4 minutes to spare. Jerome opened her door precisely the way the manual specified, offering his hand for balance that she ignored. She was already moving toward the entrance, and he had to hurry to keep up, unsure if he was supposed to follow or wait with the car. "Park and wait," she said without turning around. "This will take 90 minutes." He spent those 90 minutes studying the vehicle manual and watching other executive drivers congregate near the service entrance to smoke and complain. Their stories all sounded the same: demanding bosses, impossible hours, the constant stress of being on call for people who viewed them as equipment rather than humans. One older man laughed when Jerome mentioned he worked for Victoria Whitmore. "The Ice Queen, good luck, kid. She's burned through more drivers than anyone else in this building. Word is she's got standards nobody can meet." "What kind of standards?" "Every kind. Wrong music, wrong route, wrong temperature, wrong everything. Nothing's ever good enough for her." He lit another cigarette, the smoke curling into the morning air. "Pretty thing, though. Shame she's got ice water in her veins instead of blood." Jerome filed that information away and said nothing, unwilling to participate in the gossip, even when it matched everything he had already heard. When Victoria emerged exactly 92 minutes later, he had the door open and ready. "We're going to the office. Take 7th Avenue, not the highway. Construction is backing things up." Jerome blinked. "I was actually planning to take 7th, ma'am." "Then why are you standing here instead of driving?" The week proceeded in variations on that theme. Victoria's schedule was relentless breakfast meetings that started before dawn, back-to-back appointments across the city, lunch meetings that required driving to restaurants. Jerome couldn't have afforded to park near, much less eat, at afternoon sessions with investors or partners or government officials. She worked through every drive, phone perpetually attached to her ear or fingers flying across her tablet, and she criticized everything. The route he chose, even when it was objectively the fastest. The temperature in the car, which she adjusted 6 times during a 15-minute drive. The way he approached intersections, apparently either too cautiously or too aggressively, depending on her mood. The music volume, which he'd kept barely audible per the standards document, was still too loud for her to think. Mr. Patterson's slower approach to the curb. I don't want to appear rushed. Yes, ma'am. And the classical station is acceptable, but not this particular piece. It's too frenetic. Of course. Also, you're braking too hard. Anticipate stops more smoothly. By Wednesday, Jerome understood why 5 people had quit in 3 months. Victoria Whitmore didn't criticize to be cruel. She genuinely couldn't tolerate anything less than her definition of perfect, which seemed to exist in some theoretical realm beyond human capability. She expected him to know her preferences before she stated them, to anticipate her needs before they arose, to be simultaneously invisible and indispensable. But Jerome also noticed things the other drivers had apparently missed, details that didn't match the Ice Queen reputation. Victoria never ate lunch, surviving on coffee that she consumed in quantities that probably violated several medical recommendations. She took calls from international markets at hours that meant she was working essentially around the clock. When she thought he wasn't watching in the rearview mirror, her exhaustion showed in the way her shoulders slumped, the way she rubbed her temples like she was trying to push back a headache through sheer force of will. Thursday morning brought a new crisis. Her phone rang during the drive to a client meeting, and even through the professional partition, Jerome could hear the edge in her voice. Whitmore, what do you mean the Morrison deal fell through? That's unacceptable. No, I'll handle it myself. Have the team assembled in conference room A when I get there. She hung up and immediately made another call. Legal, this is Victoria. I need every document from the Morrison negotiation reviewed by noon. Find the loophole. There's always a loophole. For the next 20 minutes, she cycled through calls with her executive team, her voice never rising but somehow conveying infinite layers of displeasure. A 3-year project worth hundreds of millions had apparently collapsed overnight due to what she kept calling incompetent negotiation and failure to anticipate obvious objections. When Jerome opened her door at the office, she sat for a moment without moving, and he caught a glimpse of something that looked like defeat before she forced it away and became the Ice Queen again. Friday brought the first test of Jerome's commitment. They'd been driving for 12 hours straight, client dinners and emergency meetings, and a crisis that required Victoria's presence at the office until past midnight. Jerome's back ached, his eyes burned from too many hours of concentrated city driving, and he missed Zara with an intensity that felt physical. She'd be asleep at Mrs. Chen's by now, and he wouldn't see her until tomorrow morning. As they sat in late-night traffic, Victoria's phone rang for what felt like the 1,000th time that day. Her assistant's panicked voice was audible even from the driver's seat. Something about the Tokyo office and a deadline being missed and catastrophic implications for the quarterly report. Victoria closed her eyes and rubbed her temples with both hands, and Jerome watched in the rearview mirror as she seemed to physically shrink under the weight of whatever problem had just been added to her mountain of existing problems. The conversation was brief and harsh, Victoria delivering instructions with precision that bordered on cruelty before hanging up. Then she sat in the back seat, and the silence felt different than it had before, heavier somehow. Jerome took a risk. Tough day. They're all tough days, Mr. Patterson. That's the nature of business. May I ask something? What? When's the last time you took a real break, a day off? Victoria's laugh was bitter, lacking any genuine amusement. Days off are luxuries I can't afford. While I'm relaxing, competitors are working. While I'm sleeping, international markets are moving. The moment I stop pushing is the moment this company starts sliding backward. But burnout isn't productive either. She looked at him sharply, and he immediately regretted speaking. Are you giving me advice on running my company? No, ma'am, just observing that even machines need maintenance. For the first time all week, Victoria was quiet. No immediate comeback, no cutting dismissal, just silence while she apparently processed what he'd said. When they arrived at Whitmore Tower, she gathered her things and paused before opening the door. You've lasted longer than the last 3 drivers, Mr. Patterson. That's either commendable resilience or pathological stubbornness. Maybe both, ma'am. Something that might have been the ghost of a smile touched her lips there and gone. See you Monday, 6 a.m. He drove home that night feeling like he'd survived boot camp. His first week working for Victoria Whitmore had been exactly as brutal as advertised, but he'd made it through. The paycheck would hit his account next Friday, and for the first time in 6 months, he could plan beyond immediate survival. The eviction notice was still taped to his refrigerator, but now he had an answer to its implicit threat: employment income, a path forward that wasn't built on quicksand. Saturday morning, Jerome woke up to Zara bouncing on his mattress, all energy and joy, at 7 a.m. "Daddy, you're home. Can we go to the park? Can we get pancakes? I missed you so much." He pulled her into a hug and let himself feel purely grateful for this moment, this girl, this second chance at stability. Pancakes first, then park. How does that sound? Perfect, missus. Chen says, "You're working for a very important lady now." "I am. She works very hard." "Is she nice?" Jerome considered the question while getting dressed. Was Victoria nice by conventional definitions? Absolutely not. She was demanding, critical, seemingly incapable of praise or warmth. But she'd hired him when others wouldn't. She paid fairly. She held everyone to the same impossible standards she held herself to. Was that nice or something else entirely? "She's complicated, sweetie, but I think she's trying to be good at something very difficult." They spent the day doing all the things Jerome had been too stressed to enjoy over the last months. Pancakes at the diner where Zara ordered chocolate chip, and he got coffee that tasted like actual coffee instead of the burnt offerings from the internet cafe. The park where she showed him her improved skills on the monkey bars. McDonald's for dinner because he could finally afford to say yes when she asked. That night, tucking her into her corner bedroom, Zara asked the question that had apparently been building all day. "Daddy, will you have to work so late every night now?" He smoothed her braids, choosing honesty over comfort. "Sometimes, yes. The job needs me to work when Miss Whitmore works, and she works a lot. But Mrs. Chen will always be here, and I'll always come back." Promise, promise. She fell asleep holding his hand, and Jerome sat there long after she drifted off, thinking about promises and what they cost to keep. He'd promised his daughter stability, promised Victoria excellence, promised himself he wouldn't fail at this, the way he'd failed at everything else over the last 6 months. That was a lot of promises balanced on the foundation of one job working for one impossibly demanding woman. Sunday, he used part of his soon-to-arrive paycheck advance to catch up on bills. The eviction notice came down from the refrigerator, replaced by a payment confirmation for next month's rent. He bought real groceries, the kind with fresh vegetables and protein that wasn't processed. He got Zara new school supplies, the good brand of crayons, and notebooks that didn't fall apart after 2 weeks. Small victories that felt enormous after so long scraping bottom. Mrs. Chen refused his offered payment for childcare with the same firmness as always. "You need to build your savings, Jerome. I don't need money. I need to feel useful, and watching that beautiful girl makes me feel like I still matter in this world." "You matter more than you know." "Then we're even. You give me purpose, I give you peace of mind. That's better than money anyway." Monday morning arrived with a crisis that would test every commitment Jerome had made. He was preparing to leave for work when his phone rang. Mrs. Chen's voice, usually so steady, shook with pain and fear. "Jerome, I'm so sorry. I fell. The stairs, my hip. The paramedics are here. They're taking me to the hospital. I can't watch Zara today. I'm so sorry." His world tilted. Mrs. Chen injured, his childcare evaporated, and his first real day back at work after a week that had barely qualified as probation. No backup plan, no alternatives, and a boss who'd made it crystal clear that personal problems were not acceptable excuses for professional failures. He looked at Zara, already dressed for school, oblivious to the catastrophe unfolding. 7 years old and about to become the reason her father lost the job that was supposed to save them both. Every option was bad. Call in sick on his second Monday and probably get fired. Leave Zara alone and be a terrible father. Show up to Victoria Whitmore's office with a 7-year-old and be a terrible employee. There were no good choices, only terrible ones with different consequences. In the end, the decision made itself. He couldn't leave his daughter alone, wouldn't risk her safety for any job. If Victoria fired him, at least he'd still have his integrity and his daughter's trust. Cold comfort when the eviction notice inevitably returned, but comfort nonetheless. He called Victoria's assistant at 5:45 a.m., his hands shaking slightly. "This is Jerome Patterson. I need to speak with Miss Whitmore immediately. There's an emergency situation." The assistant's voice was professionally skeptical. Miss Whitmore doesn't take calls before 6 unless it's genuinely urgent. It's urgent, please. A pause, some muffled conversation, then Victoria's voice is sharp with concern that might have been for business rather than personal welfare. Mr. Patterson, what's wrong? He explained rapidly. Mrs. Chen's fall, the hospital, the complete absence of alternative childcare, his awareness that this was unacceptable but unavoidable. The words came out rushed and probably unprofessional, but he was past caring about presentation. Silence on the other end, long enough that Jerome thought she might have hung up. Then, where is your daughter now? With me, in my car. I know this is completely inappropriate and not what you hired me for, but I have no other options. I can work today and figure out something more permanent by tomorrow. More silence. Jerome could hear his own breathing, Zara's questions from the back seat that he was ignoring the ambient sounds of early morning traffic. His entire future balanced on whatever was happening in Victoria Whitmore's head as she processed this deviation from acceptable professional conduct. Bring her up. I'm sorry, what? Your daughter, bring her to my office. We'll figure something out from there. Jerome stared at his phone like it had started speaking a foreign language. Miss Whitmore, I don't understand. Neither do I, Mr. Patterson, but standing in your car debating this wastes time neither of us have. Bring Zara to the office. I'll have Rachel set up an area where she can wait while we handle the day's schedule. This is not a permanent solution, but it's what we have for today. She hung up before he could respond, leaving Jerome sitting in his car, trying to process what had just happened. Victoria Whitmore, who'd criticized his route choices and music volume and approach angles, had just offered to accommodate his daughter in her office, rather than fire him for the massive professional failure this represented. Daddy, what's wrong? He turned around to look at Zara, her backpack on ready for school. She wasn't attending. Baby girl, we're going to take a field trip today. You're going to come to work with Daddy. Her eyes went wide. Really, I get to see where you work. Yes, but you have to promise to be very, very good. The lady I work for is very important and very busy, and we can't disturb her. Can you do that? Zara nodded with the seriousness only children could summon when they sensed adult anxiety. I promise, I'll be so quiet they won't even know I'm there. The drive to Whitmore Tower felt surreal. Jerome kept expecting Victoria to call back and say she'd reconsidered, that this was inappropriate after all, that he was fired effective immediately. But his phone stayed silent, and at 6:15, he pulled into the executive garage with his daughter in the back seat instead of his boss. Victoria was waiting by the car, and this time her expression was readable. Curiosity mixed with something that might have been awkwardness, like she'd made an offer she didn't quite know how to follow through on. Zara emerged like a small explosion of energy, her purple backpack bouncing against her shoulders, her eyes taking in everything with the wonder of a child in an entirely new environment. Wow, this building is so tall. Victoria blinked, clearly unaccustomed to enthusiasm at 6 in the morning. It's 43 floors. That's a lot of floors. I live on the second floor, and that seems like a lot of stairs already. Something shifted in Victoria's face, the ice cracking just slightly. She looked at Jerome, then back at Zara, then seemed to make a decision. You must be Zara. Your father has told me you're very smart. Zara beamed. I'm going to be a scientist when I grow up. I want to find cures for cancer so people don't have to be sick. Victoria's expression did something complex, cycling through surprise and something that looked almost like pain before settling back into professional neutrality. That's an admirable goal. The world needs more women in STEM fields. They rode the elevator to the 40th floor, Zara chattering about her school projects and her love of butterflies and asking questions. Victoria answered with more patience than Jerome had known she possessed. In the office, Rachel had already set up a corner with activities, coloring books, tablets, loaded with educational games, pillows that turned the marble floor into something approximating comfortable. Hi, Zara. I'm Rachel. Your dad said you like to draw, so I brought some supplies. Zara's face lit up. Thank you. Can I draw you a picture? I'd love that. The morning proceeded in a way that defied every expectation Jerome had built over his first week. Victoria's schedule was still brutal. 3 conference calls before 8 a.m., a meeting with the legal team about the Morrison deal, that was apparently not as dead as initially reported video conferences with international offices that required her to code switch between languages with impressive fluency. But every hour or so, she'd emerge from her office and check on Zara. Not in a way that disrupted her workflow, but Jerome noticed. He watched Victoria explain what she did to his daughter in terms simplified but not condescending. He saw Zara show her drawings and Victoria actually look at them, point out details, ask questions about color choices. During the legal meeting, Zara sat in the corner of the conference room with her tablet and headphones perfectly still, except for the occasional giggle at whatever game she was playing. The lawyers kept glancing at her like she was a bomb that might detonate, but Victoria acted like having a 7-year-old in a corporate strategy session was completely normal. At lunchtime, Rachel ordered food from somewhere that served actual vegetables, and Zara ate with the kind of enthusiasm Jerome recognized as genuine hunger-meeting quality nutrition. "Miss Victoria, why don't you eat lunch?" Victoria paused with her coffee cup halfway to her lips. "I'm usually too busy." "But won't you get hungry? Daddy says you have to eat to have energy to work hard." "Your father is very wise." Zara considered this with the seriousness of childhood. "He says you work very hard. That's why you're tired sometimes. But if you eat lunch, maybe you wouldn't be so tired." Jerome wanted to interrupt to apologize for his daughter's directness, but Victoria held up a hand. "That's solid logic. Perhaps I should reconsider my nutritional habits." To Jerome's absolute shock, Victoria actually ate a salad while working through the afternoon contracts. Small victory, probably meaningless in the grand scheme, but it felt significant somehow. Zara had accomplished in one observation what presumably dozens of executives and assistants had failed to achieve, getting Victoria Whitmore to acknowledge basic human needs. The afternoon brought another crisis, this one involving a product launch timeline that had apparently been accelerated without Victoria's approval. She spent an hour on a conference call that Jerome could hear from the outer office, her voice never rising, but somehow conveying volcanic fury at whoever had made unauthorized decisions. Zara looked up from her drawing. "Daddy, is Miss Victoria mad?" "She's handling a work problem, sweetie." "She sounds like you did when I accidentally broke your tablet. Remember, you were upset, but you used your calm voice because being loud doesn't fix things." Out of the mouths of babes. Jerome wondered how much wisdom was contained in children's observations, the things they saw before the world taught them to pretend they didn't notice. When Victoria emerged from that call, she looked exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. She stood by the window staring out at the city, and Jerome could see the weight she carried in the set of her shoulders. Zara walked over with her latest drawing, holding it up. "I made you a butterfly, Miss Victoria. Butterflies are my favorite because they transform into something beautiful." Victoria took the picture, and Jerome watched something happen to her face. The ice didn't just crack. It shattered. For just a moment, she looked young and overwhelmed and achingly human. "Thank you, Zara. This is beautiful. You should put it on your desk so you can see it when you're working. Then you'll remember that hard work pays off like caterpillars working hard to become butterflies." Victoria's eyes met Jerome's across the office, and he saw questions there that neither of them knew how to answer. Then she smiled a real smile that transformed her entire face and taped Zara's drawing to the edge of her computer monitor. "You're right. I should remember that." The day ended at 8 p.m., 14 hours after it started, and Zara had somehow maintained good behavior the entire time. In the car on the way home, she fell asleep immediately, worn out by excitement and novelty. Victoria sat in the back seat, unusually quiet. At a red light, she spoke. "Your daughter is remarkable, Mr. Patterson." "Thank you. She's the best thing in my life." "How do you do it?" "Work this schedule and still be present for her." Jerome thought about the question, about all the ways he failed and succeeded simultaneously. "Honestly, I don't always do it well. I miss things. Parent-teacher conferences, I can't attend bedtimes I'm not there for. But I show up when I can, and I make sure she knows she matters more than any job. Even this one. Even this one, no offense intended." Victoria was quiet for a long moment. "None taken. That's actually the most sensible priority structure I've heard in a long time." They pulled up to Jerome's apartment building, and he started to gather Zara to carry her inside. Victoria stopped him with a question that sounded like it cost her something to ask. "Mr. Patterson, I've arranged for your daughter to have tutoring sessions with my assistant's daughter starting tomorrow." Rachel's girl is 9, and from what I observed today, they'd get along well. This isn't charity. Consistent childcare will make you a more reliable employee, which serves my interests. Jerome stared at her, this woman who'd spent a week criticizing his every choice and now was offering to help solve his most pressing problem. Miss Whitmore, that's incredibly generous. It's practical, nothing more. But he saw through the business-like tone, saw the hint of color in her cheeks that suggested she was uncomfortable with her own kindness. Victoria Whitmore, the Ice Queen, had spent a day accommodating his daughter and was now arranging ongoing care because somewhere beneath all that armor was a person who understood what struggling parents needed. "Thank you," he said quietly. "This means everything. Don't read more into it than necessary. I'll see you tomorrow, 6 a.m. She didn't meet his eyes when she said it, and Jerome wondered what it cost her to let someone see her being kind. He carried Zara inside his daughter, mumbling in her sleep about butterflies and tall buildings, and felt something shift in his understanding of the woman he worked for. That night, after settling Zara into bed, Jerome sat at his kitchen table and thought about the day's events. Every expectation had been subverted. The boss, known for being impossible, had been patient with a 7-year-old. The woman who never took breaks had eaten lunch because a child suggested it. The Ice Queen had smiled at a crayon drawing and taped it where she'd see it every day. He thought about what that legal team member had said during the meeting when they thought Jerome wasn't listening. "I've worked for Victoria for 2 years, and I've never seen her smile before today. That kid did something none of us could manage." Maybe that was the truth everyone had missed. Victoria Whitmore wasn't actually cold. She was defended, protected by layers of ice that kept the business world at bay, but also kept connection out. And maybe, just maybe, his daughter had found a crack in that defense that no adult had been able to penetrate. Tuesday brought confirmation that the arrangement was real. Rachel's daughter, Maya, was indeed 9, bright and chatty, and delighted to have a younger friend. The tutoring sessions happened in a spare office at Whitmore Industries, supervised by Rachel during slow periods. Zara came home bubbling about fractions and the new friend who liked science almost as much as she did. Over the following weeks, a routine developed that felt sustainable for the first time since Jerome had lost his original job. Drop Zara at the Whitmore building where Maya and Rachel met them. Work Victoria's relentless schedule. Pick up Zara at the end of the day, both girls usually deep in some project that involved glitter and ambitious scientific hypotheses. Victoria's demeanor shifted in ways Jerome struggled to quantify. She still criticized his route choices and music selections. She still worked 18-hour days and expected him to match her endurance. But there was warmth now where there had been only ice. She asked about Zara's school progress and actually listened to his answers. She remembered details about his life that he'd mentioned in passing and referenced them later. "How did your daughter's math test go?" she asked one morning during the drive to a breakfast meeting. "She got an A-. She's been working with Maya on fractions, and it's really clicking for her." "Excellent. Academic achievement at her age establishes patterns that persist through higher education. She wants to be a scientist, says she's going to find cures for diseases." Victoria smiled, that same genuine expression that had appeared more frequently over the past weeks. "Smart girl. The world needs more women in STEM fields. Perhaps I should arrange for her to tour our research and development department." "You don't have to do that." "I want to. Besides exposing children to career possibilities, early improves outcome metrics significantly." Jerome recognized the pattern now, Victoria offering kindness, but framing it as business strategy, as if admitting she cared was somehow weakness. He wondered what had happened to her to make compassion feel like something requiring camouflage. The shift became most apparent during a business lunch that ran 40 minutes over schedule. Victoria was mid-negotiation with a potential partner when Jerome caught her eye and pointed at his watch. They were supposed to pick up Zara and Maya from their tutoring session, and being late would mean leaving the girls waiting. Victoria held up a finger 1 minute, then she turned to the executives across the table and said something that apparently no one expected. "Gentlemen, we'll have to continue this discussion tomorrow. I have a prior commitment that can't be postponed. But we flew in specifically for this meeting. Surely an extra hour. Tomorrow, my assistant will coordinate scheduling." She stood and the negotiation was over whether they liked it or not. In the car, Jerome had to ask, "You just walked away from a multi-million-dollar deal." "I walked away from a meeting. The deal will still be there tomorrow." Zara won't be 7 years old forever, and keeping her waiting sends the message that she's less important than money. Victoria met his eyes in the rearview mirror. I've learned recently that there are things more valuable than quarterly profits. They arrived at the office to find Zara and Maya deep in a presentation about butterfly metamorphosis, complete with poster boards and citations from websites they'd researched. Victoria watched the entire thing with attention that seemed genuine, asking questions that made both girls light up with pride. Later, driving home, Zara chattered about the day while Jerome processed what he'd witnessed. Victoria Whitmore had literally walked away from a negotiation to avoid disappointing his daughter. The woman who'd spent 3 years building a reputation for ruthless business focus had chosen a 7-year-old's feelings over professional advancement. Daddy, can Miss Victoria come to my school presentation next week? The question cut through his thoughts. Sweetie, she's very busy with work. Victoria's voice came from the back seat, quiet but clear. When is the presentation? Next Friday at 2 p.m., but really you don't have to. I'll clear my schedule. Jerome stared at her in the rearview mirror, searching for signs. This was some elaborate joke. You're serious. I don't make offers I don't intend to keep. What's the presentation topic? Zara bounced in her seat. Butterflies, how they transform from caterpillars into something completely different. It's about change and growth and becoming who you're supposed to be. Victoria's expression did something complex, and Jerome wondered what nerves that topic touched. That sounds fascinating. I'll be there. And she was. Friday afternoon, Victoria Whitmore, CEO of a billion-dollar corporation, sat in a too small plastic chair in an elementary school classroom, watching Zara present her project with rapt attention that made his daughter beam with pride. The presentation was exactly what you'd expect from a 7-year-old, enthusiastic, slightly disorganized, full of facts delivered with the conviction of newfound expertise. Zara explained metamorphosis, talked about different butterfly species, and concluded with a statement that made half the room smile and Victoria's eyes glisten suspiciously. And the most important thing about butterflies is that they have to go through something hard to become beautiful. Being in the cocoon probably isn't fun, but it's necessary for transformation. Sometimes we have to go through difficult things to become who we're meant to be. And the teacher led applause, and Victoria joined in, and Jerome watched this impossible moment, thinking about transformation in all its forms. His daughter understanding change better than most adults. His employer learning to be human again. Himself discovering that rock bottom could sometimes be the foundation for building something better. Afterward, walking to the car, Victoria was unusually quiet. Jerome gave her space, sensing she was processing something that didn't have easy words attached. Mr. Patterson? Yes, ma'am. That presentation. What Zara said about transformation requiring difficulty. Do you believe that? He thought about the question about eviction notices and unemployment and 6 months of failure that had led him here. I think we don't usually choose the cocoon. We get forced into it by circumstances. But what we do in there, how we handle the dark and cramped space that determines what we become when we finally break free. Victoria nodded slowly. I've been in a cocoon for 3 years, built it myself out of work and isolation, and the belief that transformation meant becoming harder, colder, more efficient. She paused, and when she continued, her voice was softer. Your daughter made me wonder if maybe I was transforming into the wrong thing. Jerome didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Sometimes silence was the most appropriate response to someone's confession. They drove back to the office in quiet, broken only by Zara's happy chatter about how well the presentation had gone. Victoria returned to her endless work, and Jerome returned to his role as driver. But something had shifted between them, some recognition that they were both in their own cocoons trying to figure out what they were supposed to become. The shift from professional distance to something more dangerous happened gradually then, all at once. It started with late-night drives when Victoria's guard came down, when exhaustion stripped away the corporate armor and left only a woman trying to carry more than anyone should have to bear alone. Jerome found himself looking forward to those moments with an intensity that should have warned him he was crossing lines that couldn't be uncrossed. 3 weeks after the school presentation, they were returning from a client dinner that had gone poorly. Victoria had spent 2 hours negotiating with executives who'd clearly already decided against the partnership, going through motions because walking away early would signal weakness. Jerome had watched her maintain perfect composure through subtle condescension and thinly veiled dismissals, her smile never wavering, even as insults dressed as business concerns landed like carefully aimed arrows. In the car afterward, she finally let the facade crack. Her hands shook slightly as she loosened the scarf at her throat, and when Jerome glanced in the rearview mirror, he saw tears threatening to spill over before she forced them back through sheer will. They never intended to partner with us. The entire dinner was theater so they could tell their board they'd explored all options before going with our competitor. Jerome kept his voice gentle. How do you know? Because I've played the same game 100 times. You go through the motions, let them present their case, then reject them, with documentation proving you did due diligence. It's business. She laughed bitter and raw, efficient, pragmatic, and completely soul-destroying. He wanted to reach back, offer physical comfort, but the professional boundary held him in place. Not every negotiation can be a win. I don't need to win every negotiation. I need people to stop treating me like I'm still 26 and playing dress-up in my father's office. Her voice carried years of accumulated frustration. I've tripled revenue, expanded into 4 new markets, and maintained employee satisfaction ratings higher than industry average. But none of that matters because I'm young and female, and therefore not a serious business leader. Jerome pulled into a parking lot overlooking the river, turning off the engine. They'd driven past her building, and she hadn't said anything, which meant maybe she needed this moment more than she needed to get back to work. May I tell you something? Victoria met his eyes in the mirror. What? In 3 months of working for you, I've watched you outthink people with twice your experience. I've seen you make decisions in seconds that others would agonize over for days. You speak 4 languages, remember everyone's names, and somehow keep track of 1,000 moving pieces without missing details. He paused, making sure she was actually hearing him. Anyone who doesn't see you as a serious leader is deliberately choosing blindness over truth. Silence filled the car, heavy with something that felt more significant than his words should have warranted. Victoria's reflection showed an expression he'd never seen before, vulnerable and uncertain, and achingly young. Why are you always so kind to me? The question caught him off guard. Why wouldn't I be? Because I'm difficult, demanding. I criticize constantly and expect perfection in a world that doesn't produce it. Most people either resent me or fear me, and I've accepted that as the cost of leadership. She shifted in her seat, leaning forward slightly. But you treat me like I'm human, like my impossible standards are understandable rather than evidence of fundamental character flaws. Jerome chose his words carefully, aware they were having a conversation that went beyond employer-employee dynamics. You're not difficult, Miss Whitmore. You're excellent in a world that punishes excellence in women while rewarding it in men. The difference is context, not character. Something changed in Victoria's face, the ice that usually guarded her completely melting away. Jerome. It was the first time she'd used his first name outside of the context of introducing him to others. The intimacy of it landed like a physical touch, shifting the atmosphere into the car from professional to personal in a single word. Yes, thank you for seeing me when most people only see the reputation. They sat in the parking lot for another 10 minutes talking about nothing important and everything that mattered. She told him about her father, the tech genius who'd built an empire, but had no idea how to build a relationship with his daughter. How she'd spent her childhood trying to earn his attention through achievements that never quite measured up to his standards. How inheriting his company at 26 had felt less like opportunity and more like a final test she couldn't afford to fail. Jerome talked about his own father, the factory worker, who died too young from a cancer probably caused by workplace exposures. How his mother had worked 3 jobs to keep the family housed and fed, teaching her children that dignity came from showing up even when everything hurt. How losing his accounting job had felt like betraying every sacrifice his parents had made to give him a better life. When they finally drove to Whitmore Tower, it was past midnight, and Jerome felt like he'd traveled somewhere far from the streets of their city. Some internal geography had shifted, leaving him in territory he didn't quite recognize. The next morning, Victoria greeted him with coffee from his favorite place, a small gesture that shouldn't have meant anything, and somehow meant everything. She remembered how he took it 2 sugars and a splash of cream and handed it to him with a smile that was becoming less rare and more dangerous to his equilibrium. Good morning, Jerome. Good morning, Miss Whitmore. We've moved past Miss Whitmore in private, I think. Victoria's fine. He tested the name, feeling how it changed things. Victoria. Her smile widened, and Jerome realized with dawning alarm that he was falling for his employer. Not the CEO, not the billionaire, but the woman who drank too much coffee and worked too hard and smiled like sunrise when someone saw past her defenses. Zara noticed the change before he admitted it to himself. She was spending more time at the office now that summer had started, and her presence had become woven into the fabric of Victoria's workday. The woman who'd never taken breaks now scheduled lunch around what Zara wanted to eat. Board meetings accommodated a 7-year-old's presence because Victoria simply announced she wasn't leaving her goddaughter unsupervised. The goddaughter thing had happened a week earlier, Victoria asking permission in that formal way she approached personal matters, as if Jerome might refuse. He'd said yes, because how could he not, when his daughter looked at Victoria with pure adoration, and Victoria looked back with something like wonder. Daddy, Miss Victoria is going to teach me about computers today. Real programming, not just games. That's great, baby girl. Make sure you pay attention. She's really smart, isn't she? Jerome glanced at Victoria through the office window, watching her explain something to Zara with patient attention. The smartest person I've ever met. Do you think she's pretty too? The question made him freeze. Why would you ask that? Zara gave him the look children deploy when adults are being deliberately obtuse. Because you smile different when you talk about her. The same way Uncle Marcus smiled about Aunt Jennifer before they got married. He had no defense against 7-year-old observational skills. Miss Victoria is very beautiful, but more importantly, she's kind and brilliant and one of the best people I know. So you do like her? Zara, it's complicated. Why, if you like someone and they like you back, that seems simple. If only adult relationships operated on childhood logic, Jerome thought. If only liking someone was enough when power dynamics and public scrutiny and massive wealth disparities created complications that innocent hearts couldn't understand. But Zara was right about one thing: Victoria liked him back. He saw it in small gestures that accumulated into undeniable truth. How she found reasons to extend drives so they could talk longer. How she asked his opinion on decisions that had nothing to do with driving. How her face lit up when he walked into a room, that sunrise smile reserved increasingly for him alone. The dangerous territory conversation happened on a Friday evening after everyone else had left the office. Victoria's schedule had finally cleared, and instead of heading home, she'd asked Jerome to stay. They sat in her office, the city lights spreading below them like scattered diamonds, and the weight of everything unspoken pressed against the carefully maintained boundaries. We need to talk about what's happening here. Jerome's heart kicked into a rhythm that felt more like alarm than anticipation. What do you mean, Eppin? Victoria stood and moved to the windows, her reflection ghostly against the darkening glass. You know exactly what I mean. This thing between us that's becoming harder to ignore or explain away as professional courtesy. He couldn't deny what they both felt, so he didn't try. I know. Jerome, I'm your employer. This could complicate everything. It already has. She turned to face him, and the vulnerability in her expression made his chest ache. I've never been in a relationship. Not a real one. I went from my father's house to college to running this company, and somewhere along the way I convinced myself that personal connections were liabilities I couldn't afford. What changed? You, Zara. This strange little family dynamic we've created that makes me remember I'm supposed to be more than just a CEO. She moved closer, and Jerome stood, the space between them, charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. I don't know how to do this, how to want someone and still maintain professional boundaries, how to let myself feel things when feelings have always been weapons people use against me. Jerome took a risk and closed the distance between them, not touching, but near enough to feel her warmth. Then we figure it out together. Make new rules that work for us instead of trying to fit into someone else's template. What if we fail? What if this ruins everything we've built? What if we succeed? What if choosing risk over safety actually leads somewhere better than either of us could reach alone? Victoria looked up at him, and Jerome saw fear and hope warring in her expression. I'm scared. So am I. But you think it's worth trying anyway. He thought about Zara's simple logic about how children understood that liking someone and being liked back should be enough. I think denying what we feel would be its own kind of failure. At least if we try, we'll know we were brave enough to reach for something real. She kissed him, then tentative and searching, and Jerome felt the world reorganize around this single point of contact. When they pulled apart, Victoria's eyes were bright with tears. She didn't try to hide. I love you. I don't know when it happened or how to manage it alongside everything else, but I love you. The words unlocked something in Jerome's chest that had been locked since his wife left, since he'd learned that love could be conditional and unreliable. I love you too. Not the CEO, not the fortune, just you, the woman who learned to eat lunch because a 7-year-old suggested it. The person who shows up for school presentations and remembers coffee orders and cries over deals that would hurt her workers. This changes everything. Everything was already changing. We're just admitting it now. They talked until past midnight, working through practicalities that felt both urgent and impossible. How to handle the power dynamic when one of them signed the other's paychecks. What to tell Zara, who already suspected something beyond her full understanding. How to navigate a world that would have opinions about their relationship ranging from skeptical to openly hostile. People will say terrible things about both of us, but especially you. Victoria's voice carried certainty born from experience with public scrutiny. They'll assume you're using me for money or status. They'll question my judgment and your character. Let them talk. Their opinions don't pay my rent or raise my daughter or make me happy. What about Zara? How would this affect her? Jerome smiled, thinking of his daughter's earlier interrogation. Zara adores you. She's been asking when you're going to be her second mom. Victoria's laugh was startled and genuine. Has she really? Every day for 2 weeks. She's already planned the wedding. Apparently it involves a lot of purple flowers. Purple is her favorite color. Everything about Zara is your favorite thing lately. Victoria reached across the space still separating them and took his hand, the touch electric and grounding simultaneously. If we do this, really do this, it changes everything. Your job, our dynamic, how people see us. The board will have opinions. The media will create narratives. Business partners might distance themselves. Then we'll handle it. Together. Together, she repeated, testing the word like he'd tested her name that morning. I like how that sounds. They made it official the following week, though official was a relative term when your relationship existed in the complicated space between personal and professional. Victoria promoted Jerome to executive assistant, a position that paid better and removed some of the clear hierarchy issues. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. The first real test came during the company's summer carnival, an event Victoria organized annually for employees and their families. She'd insisted Jerome and Zara attend, and watching her interact with his daughter, in full view of hundreds of people, made something in his chest expand painfully. They'd been careful about public displays, aware that every gesture would be analyzed and judged. But Zara was 7 and had no interest in adult complications. She grabbed Victoria's hand at the face painting booth, dragged her to the balloon animals, insisted they all ride the carousel together. And Victoria, who'd spent 3 years maintaining professional distance from everyone, let herself be pulled into childhood joy with visible delight. Jerome saw the phones come out, employees capturing moments they'd share later. He saw curious glances and whispered conversations. But he also saw Zara's happiness and Victoria's genuine smile and decided that whatever came next, this moment was worth it. The business magazines published the photos 3 days later. Ice Queen melts for the help, screamed one headline, accompanied by pictures of Victoria holding Zara's hand. Billionaire's questionable choices, announced another with images of them on the carousel looking more like a family than an employer-employee arrangement. Jerome found Victoria in her office, staring at the articles on her computer screen, her expression unreadable. I'm sorry, this is my fault for not being more careful. She looked up, and he was surprised to see her eyes were dry, her jaw set with determination rather than defeat. Jerome, I've been criticized by business journals since I took over this company. They called me too young, too emotional, too shy when I prioritize employee welfare over maximum profit. Now they're calling me too unconventional. Their opinion of my personal life matters as little as their opinion of my business strategies. But the board cares about profits and stock prices. Both have increased every quarter since I took over. My personal happiness is irrelevant to company performance, and if they wanted to make it relevant, they can try. She stood and moved around her desk, taking his hands. I won't apologize for loving you. Not to them, not to anyone. The board meeting that afternoon proved her wrong about their indifference. Harrison Blackwell, a board member who'd opposed Victoria since her father's retirement, used the photographs as ammunition for a larger attack on her leadership. These images present serious concerns about judgment and professional boundaries. The optics are problematic at best, scandalous at worst. Victoria's voice remained level despite the implicit accusation. My relationship with Jerome is personal and has no bearing on company performance. You're dating an employee. The power dynamics alone raise liability issues. Beyond that, the unconventional nature of the relationship invites speculation that damages the company's reputation. Jerome, standing against the wall, as Victoria's assistant, felt rage building at the careful way Blackwell avoided saying what he actually meant. The unconventional nature. The coded language that everyone in the room understood, but no one would speak plainly. Say what you actually mean, Harrison. Victoria's voice carried dangerous calm. You're uncomfortable that I'm dating someone who works for me, or is your concern more specific than that? Blackwell's face reddened. I think we all understand the additional complications when there are differences in background and social standing that invite public scrutiny. Differences. Victoria stood and Jerome recognized the steel in her spine. You mean Jerome is black and I'm white? You mean he was my driver and I'm a billionaire? You mean we don't fit your narrow definition of appropriate corporate romance, so you're using coded language to express racist and classist concerns while pretending you care about company optics? The room went silent. Board members stared at their tablets or the conference table anywhere but at Victoria's face. That's not I'm simply saying. You're saying that my personal choices make you uncomfortable because they challenge your assumptions about who belongs with whom. And you're using corporate governance language to dress up prejudice as professional concern. She placed both hands on the table and leaned forward. Here's what I'm saying. Jerome Patterson is twice the man you are. He's honest, hardworking, intelligent, and kind. The fact that he's black doesn't change any of those qualities, though apparently it changes your comfort level with my choices. Blackwell sputtered, looking to other board members for support that didn't materialize. The board has concerns. Then the board can replace me, but you cannot and will not dictate my personal life. Jerome is my partner, and anyone who has a problem with that is welcome to take it up with me directly instead of hiding behind concerns about optics. She gathered her materials and walked out, leaving shocked silence in her wake. Jerome followed, his heart pounding with equal parts pride and terror about what would come next. In her office, Victoria stood at the windows with her arms crossed, staring out at the city she'd fought so hard to prove herself within. You just declared war on your own board. I declared that I won't tolerate racism dressed up as corporate policy. There's a difference. Jerome moved closer, wanting to offer comfort, but unsure how. Victoria, they could vote you out. They could try, but I hold 40% of company stock, and replacing me would trigger clauses that make it financially prohibitive. They're stuck with me until I choose to leave. She turned and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. But I need you to understand what this means. They'll come after us both. Not directly, not in ways they can be called out for, but through 1,000 small cuts designed to make this relationship untenable. So we quit. Do you want to quit? Jerome thought about everything they'd built, everything they stood to lose. Then he thought about Victoria's smile and Zara's happiness and the family they were becoming against all odds. No, I want to fight for us. Even if it costs you everything. You are everything, you and Zara, and this strange, impossible thing we've created together. He closed the final distance between them, taking her face in his hands. I didn't survive 6 months of unemployment and near homelessness just to give up the best thing that ever happened to me because some board members can't handle interracial relationships. Victoria kissed him, then fierce and desperate and full of promise. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. Together. Together. The board's retaliation came in waves, each more calculated than the last. 3 days after Victoria's confrontation with Blackwell, a leaked internal memo suggested concerns about executive oversight and accountability. A week later, major shareholders received anonymous packets documenting Victoria's erratic behavior, including unauthorized promotions and questionable resource allocation to personal matters. The language was careful, legally defensible, and designed to plant seeds of doubt about her fitness for leadership. Jerome watched it unfold with growing dread, recognizing the pattern of corporate warfare even though he'd never operated at this level before. They weren't attacking Victoria directly anymore. They were building a case, accumulating documentation, creating a narrative that would justify removing her when the moment came. Margaret Chen, the board chair, and no relation to his neighbor, despite sharing a surname, called an emergency meeting for the following Monday. The email was formal and brief, stating only that matters of executive leadership required immediate board attention. Victoria read it twice, then deleted it without comment. That weekend felt stolen from someone else's life. Victoria cleared her entire schedule, something Jerome had never seen her do before. They took Zara to the aquarium where his daughter pressed her face against glass tanks and asked 1,000 questions about marine biology. They had dinner at a family restaurant where Victoria ordered off the kids' menu because Zara insisted the dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets were superior to adult food. They walked through the park at sunset, Zara running ahead to chase butterflies, while Victoria held Jerome's hand and pretended the coming storm didn't exist. Sunday night, after Zara had fallen asleep, they sat on Victoria's penthouse balcony, overlooking the city that had witnessed their entire relationship. The lights below them spread like a glittering promise of all the possibilities they might lose. They're going to call for a vote of no confidence tomorrow. Jerome had suspected as much, but hearing Victoria say it aloud made it real. Can they win? Possibly. I hold 40%, but if they can convince enough shareholders that I'm a liability, the remaining 60% could vote me out. It's unlikely, but not impossible. She took a sip of wine, her hands steady despite what she was admitting. Harrison has been working behind the scenes for weeks. Phone calls to major investors, quiet dinners where he plants concerns about my judgment. He's good at this kind of political maneuvering. What happens if they succeed? Victoria was quiet for a long moment, watching the city lights pulse and shift like living things. They'd install an interim CEO, probably someone from the existing executive team. I'd retain my stock but lose operational control. Everything I built over 3 years, every policy change and strategic initiative would be vulnerable to reversal. She turned to look at him, and the moonlight caught the angles of her face in ways that made her seem both ancient and impossibly young. But the worst part wouldn't be losing the company. It would be proving them right, proving that my father was wrong to leave this to me, that the analysts were correct about my incompetence, that Harrison's concerns about my judgment were justified all along. Jerome moved his chair closer, taking both her hands in his. Listen to me, nothing about loving me proves anything except that you're human, that you chose connection over isolation, that you're brave enough to want something beyond quarterly earnings and market dominance. Brave or stupid? Sometimes they're the same thing. She laughed, the sound carrying more pain than amusement. My father used to say that sentiment was the enemy of success, that every decision should be made with pure logic, untainted by emotion or personal attachment. He built an empire following that philosophy. And was he happy? The question landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading outward into territories Victoria rarely explored. I don't know. I never saw him be anything other than focused. Even when my mother left, even when he got sick toward the end, he just worked harder. Like if he could make the company successful enough, it would compensate for everything else he'd failed at. That's not the life you want. No, but it's the life I know how to live. She squeezed his hands, grounding herself in the contact. Until you and Zara showed me something different. Showed me that maybe my father's way wasn't the only way to measure success. They stayed on the balcony until past midnight, talking through scenarios and contingencies. Victoria had options, even if the vote went against her. She could start a new company, leverage her reputation into consulting opportunities, finally take that vacation she'd never allowed herself. But Jerome heard the hollowness in those alternatives, the way they all represented retreat rather than victory. Monday morning arrived too quickly. Victoria dressed in armor, a tailored suit that cost more than Jerome's first car heels, that added 3 inches to her height, hair pulled back in a style that emphasized the sharp intelligence of her features. She was the Ice Queen again, every vulnerability locked behind defensive walls. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. Jerome wasn't invited, but Victoria had made it clear he'd be waiting in her office when she returned, whatever the outcome. He spent the morning pretending to work reviewing schedules. He couldn't focus on answering emails that felt meaningless in light of what was happening floors below. At 11:30, his phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "Still going. This will take hours. Don't worry." But he did worry. He thought about the life they'd started building, how precarious it all was when balanced against institutional power and old money, and people who viewed their relationship as evidence of poor judgment rather than genuine connection. Zara called at noon FaceTiming from Rachel's office, where she'd been drawing during the summer day camp break. "Hi, Daddy. Is Miss Victoria? Okay, Rachel says there's a big meeting." Jerome forced his voice to stay light. "She's fine, baby girl. Just some work stuff that grown-ups have to figure out. Tell her I made her a new butterfly picture. This one is purple and gold because those are her favorite colors now." "How do you know those are her favorites?" Zara gave him the look again, the one that suggested adults were hopelessly slow. "Because purple is my favorite and gold is pretty like her hair, so obviously those should be her favorites too." The logic was unassailable by 7-year-old standards. Jerome promised to deliver the message and ended the call feeling oddly hopeful. If Zara could reduce complex adult relationships to simple color theory, maybe the rest of them were overthinking everything. The board meeting stretched past 3 p.m. Jerome knew from Victoria's text that things were going poorly. Blackwell had indeed called for a vote of no confidence. Multiple board members had raised concerns about leadership stability and public perception. The fact that stock prices and revenue had continued climbing under Victoria's tenure seemed irrelevant compared to photographs of her holding a 7-year-old's hand at a company carnival. At 4:17, Victoria finally returned to her office. She looked exhausted in ways that went beyond physical tiredness, like something essential had been carved out and left behind in that conference room. "They're voting tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., final decision after overnight consideration of all presented evidence." Jerome stood and pulled her into his arms, feeling her weight sag against him. "What evidence you've increased profits every quarter? Employee satisfaction is higher than it's been in a decade. Every metric that matters shows improvement under your leadership. None of that matters as much as the narrative they've constructed. Young woman makes emotional decisions, inappropriate relationship with subordinate, questionable judgment regarding personal versus professional boundaries." She pulled back to look at him, and her eyes carried a hardness he hadn't seen since his first interview. "They've turned our relationship into a case study in why women shouldn't run major corporations. We're too emotional, too easily swayed by personal feelings, too willing to let sentiment override business sense." That's insane. That's reality. Male CEOs date subordinates constantly, and it's barely commented on. But when I do it, it becomes evidence of fundamental character flaws. Jerome felt rage building in his chest, the kind that came from watching someone you loved be judged by standards that shifted based on gender and race and predetermined assumptions about who deserved power. "So what do we do?" "Oh." Victoria moved to her desk and pulled up a document she'd apparently been drafting during the meeting. "I'm calling a press conference tomorrow morning, 8 a.m., 1 hour before the board vote. What are you going to say? The truth. All of it. That I love you. That loving you makes me a better leader, not a worse one. That the board's concerns have nothing to do with company performance and everything to do with outdated ideas about appropriate relationships." She looked up, and the determination in her expression was fierce enough to burn. "I'm going to make them choose publicly, support me and my choices, or fire me in front of every media outlet that matters." "Victoria, that's incredibly risky." "Everything worth doing is risky. You taught me that." He wanted to argue to find some safer path that didn't involve putting everything on the line. But he also recognized the truth in what she was planning. Sometimes the only way forward was straight through the fire, trusting that you'd emerge transformed rather than destroyed. That evening, Victoria wrote and rewrote her statement a dozen times. Jerome watched her pace her office, discarding versions that sounded too defensive or too apologetic or not strong enough. Finally, around 9 p.m., she settled on something that made her smile with grim satisfaction. "Want to hear it?" Always. She stood assuming the posture she'd use at the press conference and began speaking in the voice that had commanded boardrooms and intimidated competitors for 3 years. I stand before you today as the CEO of Whitmore Industries and as a woman in love. For 3 years, I've run this company with one priority: increasing shareholder value. Today, I'm announcing a new priority: creating a company culture that values human dignity, personal happiness, and authentic relationships. I love Jerome Patterson. He's made me a better leader, a better person, and hopefully someday a better mother to his remarkable daughter. If the board feels my personal happiness compromises my professional effectiveness, they're welcome to replace me. But they will not intimidate me into sacrificing love for their comfort. The words hung in the air between them, brave and terrifying, and absolutely perfect. Jerome crossed the room and kissed her, pouring everything he couldn't say into that contact. Whatever happens tomorrow, I'm proud of you. Even if I lose everything, you won't lose everything. You'll lose a company. You'll still have yourself, your integrity, and us, the things that actually matter. Tuesday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. Victoria dressed in softer colors than usual, a strategic choice that made her look approachable rather than intimidating. They drove to the press conference venue in silence, both processing what the next hours would bring. The media room was packed with journalists from every major outlet. Business reporters who'd covered Victoria since she took over. Technology press interested in leadership drama. Even a few mainstream news cameras, because apparently a billionaire's romantic life qualified as general interest content. Victoria stood at the podium with the kind of calm Jerome recognized as manufactured. She was terrified underneath, but she'd never let them see it. The statement she delivered matched what she'd practiced, every word precisely chosen, and delivered with conviction that dared anyone to question her. Cameras flashed like strobe lights. Reporters typed frantically. Someone in the back row actually gasped when she said Jerome's name and declared her love publicly. The questions afterward were predictable and invasive. How long had they been seeing each other? Did she acknowledge the power imbalance? What did she say to critics who viewed this as evidence of poor judgment? Victoria answered each question with patience and steel, never defensive, but never apologizing either. One reporter asked the question Jerome had been dreading. Miss Whitmore, some observers have suggested that the interracial nature of your relationship adds another layer of complexity to public perception. Do you have concerns about how this relationship will be viewed given racial dynamics in corporate America? Victoria's expression hardened into something that could have cut glass. I have concerns about a media landscape that views loving someone of a different race as newsworthy in 2024. Jerome's race is relevant only to people who think it should be. Everyone else recognizes him as an exceptionally qualified professional who happens to be the person I love. If observers are uncomfortable with interracial relationships, that reveals their limitations, not ours. The answer went viral within hours. By the time Victoria walked into the board meeting at 9 a.m., Team Victoria was trending on social media alongside less supportive hashtags that proved her point about persistent racism. Jerome waited in her office with Zara, who'd insisted on being there despite not fully understanding what was happening. They colored together, or pretended to, while the minutes crawled past like wounded things. At 11:15, Victoria finally returned. Her expression was unreadable, and Jerome's heart stopped in his chest, waiting for her to speak. The vote was 7-5 in my favor. I keep my position, my authority, and my ability to make decisions without board approval for strategic initiatives under $50 million. Relief crashed through Jerome like a wave. You won. We won. The press conference changed everything. By making it public, by forcing them to choose sides visibly, I made firing me more costly than accepting my choices. She moved to where Zara was coloring, kneeling down to her level. Hey, butterfly girl, thanks for waiting. Zara threw her arms around Victoria's neck. Rachel said you had a really important meeting. Did you win? I did, because I fought for what matters most. Fighting for love is important. That's what Daddy always says. Victoria met Jerome's eyes over Zara's head, and something passed between them that needed no words. They'd survived the first real test of their relationship, emerged intact, if not unscathed. But Victoria had one more surprise waiting. She called an all-staff meeting that afternoon, standing in the main conference room, with every Whitmore Industries employee watching via video feed. As of today, I'm promoting Jerome Patterson to Vice President of Operations. His background in accounting, his observations about efficiency improvements, and his insights into employee relations make him uniquely qualified to help streamline our processes across divisions. The announcement sent shockwaves through the company. Blackwell, still seething from his failed vote, immediately challenged the decision. This is nepotism. You're promoting someone you're romantically involved with. I'm promoting someone whose qualifications speak for themselves. Jerome has been essentially managing my operational logistics for months while simultaneously identifying inefficiencies in our scheduling and resource allocation. The promotion makes official what's already been happening informally. She paused, letting her next words land with maximum impact. If you'd like to review his qualifications against other candidates for the position, I'm happy to provide documentation. But we both know your objection has nothing to do with his credentials and everything to do with your discomfort with my personal choices. Blackwell had no response that wouldn't prove her point. Jerome stood there, still processing that his life had just changed again in ways he hadn't anticipated. That night, after Zara was asleep in the spare bedroom of Victoria's penthouse, where she'd essentially moved in over the past weeks, they sat on the balcony and processed everything that had happened. Vice President, I don't even know what that means in practical terms. Victoria smiled, the real one that transformed her face. It means you have real authority to make operational changes. It means your salary just tripled. It means we're genuinely partners in running this company, not just in our personal lives. You didn't have to do that. I did actually, because keeping you as my assistant while we're in a relationship would have been the nepotism they accused me of. Promoting you based on merit that happens to coincide with our relationship is just good business. She took his hand, threading their fingers together. Plus, you're genuinely qualified. You've been doing the job already. This just makes it official and pays you appropriately. Jerome thought about the eviction notice from months ago, the $43 in his bank account, the desperate feeling of failure that had driven him to apply for a job everyone said was impossible. All of that felt like it had happened to someone else, a different version of himself who couldn't have imagined ending up here. What happens now? Now we live our lives, we work together, love each other, raise Zara, and prove that all of this was worth fighting for. 3 months later, Jerome proposed in the park where they'd walked that stolen weekend before the board meeting. Zara helped plan the whole thing, insisting on purple flowers and a speech about butterflies and transformation. Victoria cried genuine tears and said yes before he'd finished asking the question. The wedding took place on a Saturday in early October when the weather had just started cooling into autumn comfort. Zara had gotten her way about everything, purple flowers everywhere, purple bridesmaid dresses for Rachel and her daughter Maya, even purple ties for the groomsmen. Jerome had recruited from his old accounting firm friends who'd stuck by him through unemployment. The ceremony was small despite Victoria's wealth. Maybe 50 people who actually mattered rather than the hundreds a CEO wedding typically required. Mrs. Chen, recovered from her hip surgery, sat in the front row crying happy tears. Rachel and her family filled another row, Maya bouncing excitedly next to Zara. Victoria walked down the aisle unescorted, having politely informed her father that his disapproval of her choices meant he'd forfeited the right to give her away. She looked breathtaking in a dress that managed to be both elegant and somehow purple adjacent in its deep plum color. Jerome's mother had flown in from Georgia, and he watched her tear up as her son married a woman who defied every expectation. His sisters stood as witnesses, both of them having already adopted Victoria into the family with the enthusiasm usually reserved for lottery winners. The vows were personal and real. Jerome spoke about unexpected blessings and finding home in unlikely places. Victoria talked about transformation and risk and choosing love over fear. Zara, serving as maid of honor despite being 8 years old now, held both rings and took her responsibility with adorable seriousness. When the officiant pronounced them married, Jerome kissed his wife, and heard Zara cheer loudly enough to make everyone laugh. The reception was exactly what they'd wanted. Good food, better company, and dancing that lasted until the venue threatened to charge overtime. In his speech, Jerome referenced the job posting that had started everything. I took a job no one wanted, driving for a woman everyone said was impossible to please. Instead, I found my best friend, my greatest love, and someone who taught my daughter that strength and kindness can coexist. Victoria didn't just give me employment. She gave me back my future. Victoria's speech was shorter but carried equal weight. Jerome didn't just become my driver. He became my conscience, my anchor, and my home. He and Zara showed me that success isn't measured in stock prices or quarterly reports. It's measured in moments of genuine happiness and the courage to choose love over fear. They danced their first dance to a song Zara had picked, something about butterflies and flying free. Later, alone for a moment while guests mingled, Victoria pulled Jerome aside. Happy? Impossibly so, you more than I knew how to want. She kissed him softly, not caring who saw. Thank you for being stubborn enough to stick around when everyone else quit. Thank you for letting me see past the Ice Queen. She's still here sometimes. Old habits don't disappear completely. I know. I married all of you, not just the parts that are easy. 1 year later, they sat in their backyard watching Zara practice yet another school presentation. Their house was smaller than Victoria's penthouse had been, but infinitely warmer, filled with purple decorations and family photos and the comfortable clutter of actually lived-in space. Zara had grown confident and articulate, thriving under the combined attention of three parents when counting Maya's mother, Rachel, who'd become family by proximity and affection. The girl who'd once worried about her father working late now bounded through days with the security of knowing she was loved by multiple adults committed to her welfare. Jerome pulled Victoria closer on their porch swing, breathing in the evening air and the scent of her shampoo. Any regrets? About what? Giving up the simple life of just running a billion-dollar corporation for the complicated life of marriage and stepmotherhood. Something like that. Victoria laughed, the sound carrying none of the bitterness that had characterized her early days. Running Whitmore Industries was never simple. But this is beautifully complicated in all the right ways. Board meeting went well today. Profits are up 15% this quarter. Turns out promoting based on merit rather than connections is good for business. Who would have thought? Jerome smiled, thinking about how far they'd both traveled from that first interview. Your father would be proud. I think he would be, not because of the profits, though those matter, but because I finally learned to lead with both strength and heart, something he never figured out himself. Zara ran over, interrupting their quiet moment with the energy only children possessed. Mommy Victoria, will you help me with my presentation about family traditions? Victoria's face did what it always did when Zara called her that, softening into pure love. Of course, sweetheart. What kind of traditions? The kind where people choose to love each other even when other people think it's weird or wrong. How families get created from brave choices. Jerome and Victoria exchanged glances, both amazed at their daughter's ability to distill complex social dynamics into essential truths. Zara had somehow understood that their family wasn't traditional, but was built on something more solid than tradition: deliberate choice and sustained commitment. That's exactly the kind of tradition worth preserving, Victoria said, pulling Zara into a hug that included Jerome. As sunset painted the sky purple and gold, Zara's favorite colors, Jerome reflected on the journey that had brought them here. A job no one wanted had led to a love no one expected. The former driver and the billionaire CEO had created something beautiful together, a family built on mutual respect, genuine affection, and the radical belief that love really could conquer all. In choosing each other, despite obstacles and opposition, they'd found not just happiness, but the courage to redefine success itself. The story became legend at Whitmore Industries, where employee satisfaction reached record highs under leadership that valued both excellence and humanity. But for Jerome, Victoria, and Zara, the real victory was simpler and more profound. They'd found each other, and in doing so, had found their way home.